LaGuardia, or you go through any of the politicians whose names nobody will ever know, that at some point it dawns on you that government was the vehicle that brought the Italian Americans into mainstream American. Some of them went, as I said, were professionals, were doctors, lawyers, and everything else. But for those that were not professionals, like my father, they rose socially. The Italian Americans rose socially because many of them were in government, and that's how they elevated themselves and gave themselves credibility in their own community. It is really the opportunity to run for office that I believe elevated the Italian Americans, whether it was in New York City Council, or whether it was in Monroe County or any place else like that. That's the one thing that allowed you to gain status without being a professional person.
Neighborhoods then were very ethnic. You could very well live your entire life on 3rd Street and 1st Avenue and not hear any English, not hear any other languages. Our butcher store was Don Michelangelo. That's where they got the meat. Don D'Angelo was the grocer. He owned the grocery store. We had all these service stores, the fruit markets and things like that, all Italians. And the Jewish people went to the Jewish stores, which were along 2nd Avenue. From 1st Street to 7th Street was this mix of Italian and Jewish. On 7th Street was Polish, and it was heavily Polish for 3 blocks. Then 10th Street was Ukrainian.
There was a little animosity with the Irish. You know, they forgot that they went through the same thing when they came here. You know, everybody looked down on the Irish Catholics, and they gave them a hard time.
My father was a Republican, my brother was a Republican, and it was when I was of voting age, I wanted to be just like my dad, right?
Well, my father was a Democrat, my mother was a Democrat, my brother was a Democrat, I was going to be a Democrat. I mean, there really wasn't a discussion. I mean, I came from a very working class family. My father was a painter for the city of Niagara Falls. He loved politics. He actually loved politics. He was a committee man for all the years that, you know, practically all the years that he was alive.
Who suggested that you contact Assemblyman Pelletieri to work for him?
It was actually my mother. My mother, I had gotten out of college, and my mother said to me, why don't you write Joe Pelletieri, who had just been elected to the State Assembly, why don't you see if he might have a position?
Some of them were involved in union politics. My father was a Teamster. My grandfather was involved in the Postal Service Workers Union. My grandmother, the Italian one, she was a delegate for Local 1199. I remember they had a strike in, it was 1987, and she had gotten me a job in the cafeteria at the hospital. She led the strike there as the chief shop steward, and in fact, she would make me walk the picket line with her. And I remember once during that strike, she made me lay down in the driveway with her to prevent the supply trucks from coming into the hospital. She was very militant when it came to workers' rights. So I had that background with respect to union politics, and in fact it kind of propelled me into the labor movement when I went to work for the city.
And so your father grew up as the son of this important district leader who had been an assemblyman, but wasn't anymore, but it was even more powerful, as you're saying.
You know, he worked as my grandfather's lieutenant in politics, getting votes for him whenever he ran for district leader, going out, you know, at election time, getting petitions, and, you know, on election day, getting people to the polls to vote.
So actually he studied at home.
Yeah.
Right?
On the other hand, it was in his blood like it's in mine to do it.
My grandfather came here with his father and with some of his brothers. They came here, I guess, in about 1900, 1905. They formed an ice and coal business. My grandfather did that, and so did my father. They delivered ice and coal. That was, I think, the perfect kind of business for him to be in, to pave the way for me for elected office, because you knew everyone. I could probably point to well over 40 campaigns that we've run and won in Yonkers. You know, so
when you say we, you say the Spanish.
Yeah, when I say I say we.
Right?
Yeah, I say me, my dad, between me, my dad, and my brother Nick.
No, they hated it. Hated it. Didn't know why I'd get involved in it. So when I was interested in running, one prominent family that helped me in my hometown was Italian American, the Signoracci family. And in fact, the grandson is now interning in my office here. But Ralph Signoracci at the time was involved in Democratic politics in my hometown. He was one of the first fellows that said, "You should run. We think you can win with a lot of work." And I had the people that ran my grandparents' bar and grill and restaurant, Gristini, was prominent too, and he said, "You've got to do this." So there were some Italian Americans involved, even initially when I ran.
I tell you, there was a little friction with the Irish at that time. The Irish were the district leaders, and he had a club called the Bowery Bay Democratic Club. It was on Steinway Street. And when LaPiccolo was a lawyer, he recommended him wanted them to run for one of the local positions, assemblyman or a city council position. And the district leader at that time was Frank McGlynn. His very uncouth response to him, he says, "Ralph," he says, "we can't put him up for that. He says, we're not ready for a guinea to take an elected position. I'll get him a job with the sanitation department." He says, "What do you mean? Sanitation? To pick up garbage as an attorney? You ought to be ashamed of yourself, even suggesting something like that." So they left the club and they formed their own little bit of a club on 31st Street in Astoria, a little storefront. I beat an Italian who was in a long time county committeeman, and he never expected that we could do anything. You know, they were entrenched so long, they thought that they were invincible, and we wound up taking over the leadership. And we became the recognized club in the district.
In fact, that's when I first encountered some resistance to being Italian American. Not among the population, but I recall a conversation with the head of the Democratic Party in this county at the time, Dan O'Connell, who was a legendary political figure. So when I was interested in running, I went to see him. And he said, "Kid, you can't win. First of all, you're too young." I was 32. He's, "Plus you're Italian. This is an Irish, she's an Irish mayor. The mayor was a female, Virginia McDonald. She's very popular. There's no way you're going to beat her." But he mentioned the Italian thing, which really annoyed me. But he said, "Good luck." He didn't stop me. He didn't encourage me. And I wouldn't be deterred. And I ran and won very narrowly, but I won and I defeated her.
So you could do it. You could do it. The ethnic background helps. Traditionally, Italians were Democrats. So what you got to do is make them aware of the fact that you're running, make them aware of the fact you're Italian American, but there are still some Italian Americans who will try to give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who's Italian American. And I think that was a strength of mine, it was a strength of Alphonse's, and it's a strength of Rudy Giuliani's.
But it's not a case that you are naming Serf Maltese, Alphonse D'Amato, and Rudy Giuliani. I don't think you will vote for a Democrat only because he's an Italian American. Would you?
Well, I wouldn't.
We're Democrats. Whether you're Irish, Jewish, Italian. So why would we be backing a Republican, whether he's Italian or not? Makes no difference. That's not what we're in the game for. You're part of your party politics. You're part of the Republican Party. Vote for the Republican.
So what is the difference between an Italian American Democrat and an Italian American Republican?
It's the agenda. The Republican Party basically was the party of the business community, business and the wealthy. You take a look at the Republicans. They represent mostly upstate, affluent, white communities. The city of New York is a mixture. We do have a melting pot, except that they all didn't melt together like we wanted them to. They're in the pot, but they're all separated, you know? They're like pasta fazool, everything is on the side. They don't mix them together. You've got to put them into a blender to get them to mix. But that's the difference on here. We're so diversified here. We got everybody here, mostly poor. So we represent most of the people who need help than the Republicans.
So what does it mean to be a Republican for you?
You know, it just became a way of life. My father always preached that Republicans were of less government, less taxes for the families. And that was probably from his heritage.
You mean Republican values are closer to Italian American values, you
I
think?
So.
Because of the stress in the family and this?
Well, for me it is.
But I think that the policies of conservatives and Republicans, their traditional family value policies, I think that Italian Americans are much more comfortable voting for a conservative Republican.
I think it's simplistic to make that assumption. The voting patterns don't bear that out.
Back in the early 80s, my father's district was probably, 70%, let's say 70%, Italian American, German, Irish, white Caucasian. Somewhere in the 80s, like 82 or so, his district changed to roughly 68% African American, 68% minority. And my father was faced with a very difficult decision to make. You stay running or you retire. He loved what he did. He loved his work. He loved helping people, so he stayed in there. And many people felt, how could he, a white person, represent a district that is now, like I said, almost 70% minority? And thankfully so, he won 2 subsequent elections. He was gearing up for a 3rd one. Unfortunately, he passed. You have to adapt. In Queens, our ethnic shifts happen so frequently and so drastic that if you don't adapt and change as an elected official, you suffer.
Italian Americans should be, say, ethnically proud when one of them is successful.
Absolutely.
Right? But when it comes to the ballot box, if you have to be proud of the success of your own people, then you probably should try to vote for them. Forget about the party, because they are Italian Americans.
I reject that. Again, I think Rudy Giuliani has accomplished incredible things as the grandson of an immigrant. I don't agree with his politics, but that doesn't negate, all of his accomplishments. He certainly deserves all the credit in the world for, how far he has come personally. I wouldn't vote for him, though. I don't agree with his politics. But that doesn't mean I don't have great respect for his accomplishments, or the fact that he's probably 2 generations away from grandparents who were illiterate and had very little opportunity. So it's an amazing accomplishment for Italian Americans. And we have really, come very far in a very short period of time in American history. someone like Nancy Pelosi. I don't agree with her on everything, but I'm certainly proud that she's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Again, this is a granddaughter of immigrants. You know, I mean, that's, I think, that's the American dream that Italian Americans believe in. That, you know, we could come here with nothing but the clothes on our back, and within a couple of generations, we could be, you know, a few steps away from the White House. That's the Italian American experience that we should all be proud of, regardless of what the person thinks or what the person stands for.